Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Well, welcome everybody. So before I get going, I'd like to invite you all, if you want, to go run and grab a cup of tea or coffee or your favorite beverage. Because when I get rolling here in a minute and we get to talking about what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to use that as an example that we can all walk through together. Now, if you don't want to run off and get a cup of coffee or a beverage of your choice, then you can pretend and imagine. But there it is. Okay. Very good. Very good. Go ahead, Victor. I'm going to get rolling, but we're going to review last week. So, again, welcome back. Maha Satipatthana Sutta, our discussion continues. Today, we're going to pick up with the 5 clinging aggregates. And this is a good example of something that I think we hear a lot about. You know, people are like, oh, they mention the aggregates. You'll hear it mentioned in a talk, and it can be kind of vague. What exactly are we talking about? What are those? What are the 5 clinging aggregates? And before we really get rolling on that, I wanted to go back to our sutta and see where we left off last week. Because last week we were talking about the 5 hindrances. And we looked at when we can be aware that sensual desire or ill will, sloth, drowsiness, restlessness, and anxiety and uncertainty are present in us. We recognize that. We note that. And as I mentioned kind of in last week's talk and leading up to it, is that this is a point in the sutta where I feel like it's like a roller coaster that's just reaching the top and then it suddenly shifts and becomes a little different. And that's subtle here, but I think this is, I was rereading this and I was thinking that this is right here is kind of where that happens. They discern how there is no future arising once it's been abandoned. And to discern that, you go, you start with that there's sensual desire present, and then you discern how you can abandon sensual desire or any of the 5 hindrances, and how it can vanish once it's arisen. So this abandoning verb, right, is an action, is an active thing. And prior to this, we've really just been noticing. We've just been observing. We haven't really seen anything with action. We just noticed our feelings, we noticed our body, but there's not any real action there until we get to this point. So moving on to today's topic is the 5 aggregates. We're going to take a little look at that. It's 5 hindrances, 5 clinging aggregates. So like I was saying earlier, this is maybe the shortest paragraph we're going to examine. This is really it. These 2 paragraphs are it for today. And yet, I think this is one of the most comprehensive parts of this discussion. So let's read through this together. Furthermore, the monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 5 clinging aggregates. And how does he remain focused on the mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the 5 clinging aggregates? There's the case where the monk discerns such as form, such as its origination, such as its disappearance, such as feeling, perception, fabrications, mental formations is another use of that, fabrications, such as consciousness, such as its origination, and such as its disappearance. So in other words, we notice that as these things come around, they come into existence and they pass away. And in this way, we remain focused internally on the mental qualities in and of themselves, or externally, unsustained by anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves. So let's examine that a little bit further. I made my second awesome PowerPoint presentation, and we can take a look at this together. So breaking down the term, sorry, my screen is blocked here. So breaking down the term 5 clinging aggregates. Pañcupādānakkhandhā. I don't know if I did that right, but we're going to say pancha, which means 5 in Pali, upadana, which is clinging or attachment, process of holding on to things with a desire or aversion. So again, we want it or we push it away. And khandha, aggregates, groups, or heaps, collections of elements that compose an individual experience. So here he's saying these 5 things. Stop for a second. These 5 things are who you are. This is actually an investigation about that thing. What makes us who we are? If in Buddhism there's discussion of no self, and he's saying there's not a permanent lasting self there, what's there instead? So that's the aggregates. That's what we're going to talk about today. What makes you who you are? So what he says you can observe, and we have been observing as part of this process, is basically these 5 sections. Your form, your physical material form, your body, the form of nature around you. Feelings, these are sensations experienced as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Perception, recognizing and labeling of objects in the mind. I have ill will, I have anger, I have passion. Mental formations are volitions, intentions, or habits, or ideas that we have about that. And consciousness is the awareness of, or the sensory and mental awareness of sensory and mental phenomena. So these 5 things, these 5 constituents, come together in a way that we build and identify as a self. And that's a pretty big charge. This takes a little unpacking to do, to think about. But as we go back through what we've looked at over the past several weeks, first we start with the body, and we recognize our physical body exists here, and we examine it internally and externally. We looked at the cemetery meditations and understanding what the future holds for our body. We looked at feelings, and we started to identify just simply as it arises, is this something that we find pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Our perceptions, we begin to recognize how we note things and what things we are experiencing. Tree, we see a tree at a distance and it takes a minute, but our eye identifies the tree and says that's a tree. That's a mental perception. Mental formations are then, I like this, I don't like this, I have ideas about this. And consciousness is then kind of what we build out of those things coming together. So let's try a little experiment here and see what you guys think of this. Let's just walk through this. Is this any questions? Let me stop here at this point before we do anything else. And let's sound this out as a group. Let's think about this. Because I want to not just talk, I want to involve. So we're looking at the coming together of 5 things. What parts of this, before we dive any further, what parts of this do you see and identify as like, yeah, I get that, or I don't get that? Are there things? We're taking a look. Anything that strikes you here that particularly you're finding confusing? I just kind of want to stop and give this a chance to set in. So we're looking at, there's these 5 things that come together that make us who we are. That's the charge. Okay.
List.
What's that?
The list again, maybe?
Yeah. So let's start with form. Form is this idea of like physical form. You see that you have a physical form.
Yeah.
Right? We're aware of that physical form, and we can bring our awareness to what that physical form is doing. Feelings. So feelings are not your physical form. There's something else that happens. And in this case, we look at them and label them as feeling good, feeling bad, or feeling neutral, or pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And we looked at that. That was the second thing that we kind of looked at here, right? So when you see something and it falls on your eye, then you can decide. Without that, you don't decide to how you feel. but that's feelings. Perception, again, this is the example is I used was recognizing a tree at a distance. It involves the visual information and also a mental process of connecting that visual information. You've seen something and you make a connection. So this is my hand, right? So consciousness, this is the idea of, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped. I think I was seeing shape in the distance. Mental formations. This is deciding to, this is having a thought, right? So that's Pete's hand. Wonder what would happen if he snapped it. Those things, wonder what would happen. Oh, he snapped it and I heard it. Those are another subset of what you're experiencing, not the physical part of seeing it, not the labeling of it, but an idea about it. That's his hand. He uses it to grab things. And then consciousness it comes out of that. It's like, boy, I'm glad I have a hand that I can grab things with. I become conscious and I contemplate it and I see something there. It's not my hand. It's not the formation. It's not the idea. It's not the labeling. It's none of those things. So this is a coming together of a thing, not a singular entity necessarily experience that. Let's continue. You got other stuff up, lady. What you got there, Chris?
I was just going to say, it struck me, I was just thinking about the aggregates as heaps.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the takeaways that I got from our so far in the discussion is this notion that we identify ourselves oftentimes by our heaps of aversion and clinging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of interesting. It's more than just, as you pointed out, when you look at the scale of it all, it's not just simply, oh, that doesn't feel good. Oh, that feels great. It's like, I want this. I don't want that. And
I had
what's
that
interesting
before,
is,
it was great, or I'd really like to have that.
right, I'd really like to have that. Or let's plan, because I was thinking about the term volitional, right? Volition, it's something I've been looking at in a different context in my study of Greek, and like the willing to have something, right? That's also part of this heap of clinging and aversion, right?
Yeah, that's the key.
And it's like, but more interesting to that is that almost all things I would say that I say, this is Chris, right, is a reflection of some aspect of one of those 5 classes of heaps. This is all part of the heap.
Yeah.
Chris is the heap of the particular set of aggregates that he identifies with.
At that given point in time and space.
Yeah.
Right. So let's look at these aggregates as pieces. And that's exactly, I think you're right, Chris. It's heaps. These are pieces of a puzzle. You can't really have one without the other. Can you have physical form without mental formations? Yeah, you probably can. But would you constitute that as a fully functional, as what yourself is doing? Maybe not. So let's just contemplate this a bit together. I'm going to share my screen again, continue the conversation here. So let's just walk through these one at a time and think about each one of them. And then I have another little game at the end here that we can look at this together. But let's just look at these as pieces. So the first one, the monk discerns such as form, such as its origination, such as its disappearance. This is me just breaking down this paragraph from the sutta. So this is interesting. Again, I'm always happier when I slow these things down. But he says, such as form is a thing that you're thinking about. This is my body. It has this nature. It feels, you've got this certain constituent of physical matter coming together, and such as its origination. There's a genetic story behind how my body came together, and there's a lifelong story about all of the experiences my body has had up to this minute, and it originated there. And such as its disappearance, it will not continue in the state that it's in right now. It will continue to decay. Sorry? Sound like a sports event. So, such as form, such as its origination, such as its disappearance. Let's look at the next one. This is a case where monk discerns, such are feelings, such their origination, such their disappearance. And again, Pretty simple, looking at this one piece of the puzzle. We talk about Chris talking about the aversion and the clinging, and we all experience this. There are things that we identify as that really feels good to me, to myself. I find that to be true for myself. It's pleasant or it's unpleasant. I really like broccoli. I really hate broccoli. Any number of things like that. But a feeling is that decision of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Such is the case where a monk discerns, such as perception, such as its origination, such as its disappearance. So this is recognition of a moment like, like we were saying before, seeing the shape of a tree in a distance. You perceive the object and you make a connection to what that object is. Mental formations. Sorry, button. There's a case where such are mental formations, such their origination, such their disappearance. And so again, we're looking at mental formations are ideas, concepts, or thoughts. This might be the thing that we relate most commonly to thinking, is having a mental formation. Something comes into your mind. Oh, that's right. Tonight I've got those dinner plans and I'm going to go do this thing. And doesn't that sound like fun? And I kind of want to do that. The thought comes together. The mental formation is part of this picture. And consciousness. So this is the case where we kind of start to combine these things. Here is an object I've perceived. It's fallen into my line of sight, and I've recognized it in my brain as a tree. And then I recognize that tree, and I think, oh, I remember the Buddha sat under a tree and got enlightened. And I have a mental formation about the Buddha getting enlightened under a tree. So I have a mental formation that says, I think I want to sit under a tree like the Buddha did. And I go sit under a tree and I feel content while I'm practicing because I know the Buddha practiced under that tree, which I relate. And that entire experience comes together as those 5 aggregates come together. So I'm going to walk backwards through my presentation here if I can. And I'm going to use this example of tea. And I would say, think about this, or take that drink that you have in your hand and kind of think about this as we walk through it. So taking a cup in your hand, let's do this. Let's taking your cup in your hand and take a minute and consider its form, like its physical form. Like here sits my beverage. It's a hot cup of tea, so it feels warm. I can feel the heat radiating off of it. I can smell the tea. There's a physical thing happening here. And I just recognize the physical part. So now as we start to drink our tea, you might notice the interaction of the physical, followed by what? What happens next? So you feel it, warm, hot. What happens next? Your mind identifies that and then formulates an opinion. Oh, that feels nice. That's nice warm tea. Oh, I like the way that smells, right? Linda?
Taste.
Yeah. So then you taste it. So then the taste comes together and you experience that. And your mind makes a recognition of what's happening. And we decide if we like it. And then maybe we have a mental formation like, oh yeah, I do like that. I want more of that. So we take another drink. And we find that that's pleasant. We decide, yeah, I like drinking tea. I think I'm going to keep doing that. And then your consciousness kind of forms about, oh, I feel pretty content. That was a pleasant experience. I enjoyed that one drink of tea. And in this entire thing, what the Buddha's pointing to is that there is a shifting, changing thing that's happening here. That there was things that came together. A physical thing came into contact. You recognized what that was. Your mind made a mental formation and a judgment about it. And it shifted your consciousness. and you went from a state where there was no experience of drinking tea to a state where there was an experience of drinking tea to a state where there is now not any more drinking of tea. Those things came and went.
All
And
in
that's what
flux.
say that again, Wayne?
I say it's all in flux.
It's all in flux. So, anybody got any thoughts or before I continue? Because I got a little game we can.
No, this is nice. I definitely feel like what's really interesting about the Buddha is like how many things he observed and so insightfully.
Yeah.
And it's like, wetness is an emerging property of water, right? It's an emergent property of water.
Yeah, you're recognizing the elemental nature of it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like wetness is like we perceive wetness, but like what is wetness made of, right? And what he's saying is, okay, well, perception is like this complex emergent thing. Let me see if I can try to break it down into its pieces. And it's not like unskillful to be drinking tea, right? But then at times when I'm in an unskillful situation, I can then figure out, okay, well, where's this coming from? It's like just breaking down very neutrally what are these sensations that it's made of, and what are the perceptions
Absolutely.
that it's made of that are like that add up to something more than the parts, actually, right? Because the ultimate perception of consciousness at the end is like made up of these like more tangible pieces, none of which to individually hold the key to that experience, but where you can go in individually and be like, oh yeah, this is part of that experience. Like I think it's really
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I think that you're on to seeing how the sutta, as we've just slowly unraveled it, is very intentional in how we're untangling a briar patch. Some of the things that we take to be a certain way is because we've always kind of assumed they're. And unless we slow down and really look, then we might not see how it actually functions. So an example of this is sadness is a really good example of this. It comes into my being, and when I am sad, when I'm in despair, it feels like this is going to be the way it's going to be forever. It's really hard. And we become overcome with that sadness. Now, if we are a creature that is moving through time and space, that is afflicted by things that are happening in time and space, and so a thing happens that makes that creature suffer in a way that is sadness, that's one idea. But the other idea is that observation that's happening sees a shifting change of things, and it sees in this moment loss that creates sadness, and it becomes kind of, there is loss, there is sadness, and guess what? It goes away too. As you start to kind of comprehend these things, as insights arise, why would you hold on to the sadness? As the insight arises, I'm not just a creature that is afflicted by sadness and is permanently going to be that way. And you instead are conscious. Your consciousness comes together and says, oh, wait, this is a shifting, changing, moving thing. So I don't have to feel like that sadness is a permanent thing. Then both you appreciate the sadness more and you let it pass faster. Does that make sense to everybody? That's my experience with this, is that by unraveling that briar patch, by seeing those little pieces, I can go, oh, wait, because that's the thing that he points to. I would go back to sharing my screen. In each one of these instances, he says, such is this thing, form, and it comes together and it disappears. This is what feelings are like, and they come together and they disappear. And here's what perception is like, and it comes together and it disappears. And this is what ideas are like and thoughts. This is how they come together. This is how they disappear. And there's a case where they examine the entirety of the consciousness, how it's all compounded. It's all those things coming together. How's your consciousness come together without a mental formation, without a feeling, without any of those things? How would your consciousness come together? It comes together dependent on those parts. So if any of those parts change, then your consciousness changes. So now let's take a look at some images. Here's one. It just fell into your eye. You're having an experience with it. Does it arise any feelings? Mental formations? Let me slow that down again. Here's an image. Just soak it in. What's your experience with that? It wasn't there a second ago. Now it is. A minute ago, we were talking about consciousness, drinking tea. Now we're staring at this image. Notice how your feelings about it arise. Notice how they pass away. I'm going to click in a minute. We'll look at another image. Everybody ready? Here's another image. Different than the last one. It wasn't here a minute ago, and now it is. It falls on your eye. It has a form. It's an image on the screen on your computer. It could be a painting if you were standing in front of it. It falls in front of your eye and it creates a feeling. Do you like it? Are you neutral to this image? Do you not like it? You have the perception, you recognize it for what it is, that it's an image, that it's a shape, and then you start maybe thinking about it a little bit. Like, I like that painting. Boy, I wish I painted something like that, says the artist in me. Or, yeah, if I had that thing, I'd put it in my living room. Notice how the thought arises and how it's all passed away. Here's another image. It raises a different kind of sense. It's something we've been talking about with physical form and the fact that all of us will eventually pretty much wind up like this. What kind of experience did you have when the image fell on your eye? What kind of mental formation did it create? Is it the same as the picture of the boat? Do you notice a change in your consciousness? All right, better than skeletons. We like this one better. Who doesn't love a fuzzy puppy and kitten? The image falls on your eye. You have an experience with it. Some things come together. You start to recognize, oh, I like this. I don't like this. It gives me an idea. Reminds me of my dog. I like my dog. And we can notice how those experiences arose. Pete put an image on the screen. That image fell in my eye. My eye was intact. I had a mental formation about what it was. It gave me a feeling. I decided I liked it or I didn't like it. I wanted more. I didn't want more. And all those subtle things happened. So in this way, monk remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or focused externally on mental qualities, unsustained by anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves with reference to the five clinging aggregates. That's the end of this text that we're going to study today. And it all makes me think of this moment from Alice in Wonderland with the caterpillar, who's my favorite character in Alice in Wonderland. Who are you? Said the caterpillar. Actually, who are you? Said the caterpillar. And Alice replied, I hardly know, sir. At least I knew who I was when I got up this morning. I've changed several times since then. We all change several times a day. We're constantly shifting and changing, is the truth. There's not a us that was this way this morning, and now it's a different. It's a constant shift and change. It has to be, because you're accumulating experience. You're accumulating observations. Those things are coming together into your memory, and that memory exists inside your head. It doesn't really exist outside of your head, but it does exist there. We all experience it. And yet, when we see these things, the form, and we identify, what do we identify with more, do you think? Our physical form, the form of the world, or our mental formation? Like, what is it that we really want to preserve? Like, when we really look at, like, we're a biological being and we want to preserve this part of who we are, what is that thing that we're trying to preserve? Do you think you spend more time trying to preserve your physical self or your mental self? So then we get to this crux of this issue in Buddhism, where the question is no self. And a lot of traditions, they go, I want to find my true self. And then just Buddhist discussion, we talk about that. What is your true self? And people talk about that when they approach this practice. I'm going to examine what my true self is. I'm going to find what's right for me. And this unravels that in a way where it's very difficult to say there is one permanent, lasting, true self. That thing was the self. And now this thing is not the self. It becomes something that you can't really put your finger on. So it's fair to say I have feelings. My brother makes me mad. I'm going to have feelings. When those feelings come, I'm going to have some self-preservation arise, deciding, do I like this? Do I not like this? And then the skill can come in when, like we said at the very top, where it's like, I can discern how to abandon this. I can see how it arises. I can choose to let it pass away. That's a very powerful superpower to have, to be able to recognize these things as they arise, not cling to them as yourself that needs preserved, and instead let them be to pass along on their own, of their own accord. So in Buddhism, when we say true self, that's what we're pointing to. It's not a permanent, lasting self. It is a coming together of things. And I promise your coming together of things is every bit as important and valid as everybody else's coming together of things. It's a fine coming together of things, but it is a coming together of things. And when you understand that a little different, it might change the way you interface with the world a bit. It might change how seriously you take some things and how not seriously you take other things. And that's what you have to examine for yourself. But it does happen there as you examine the 5 clinging aggregates as they happen in you. So one paragraph settled in the middle of this sutta that is super duper easy to pass over and go, yeah, I get that, is really a lot more profound than we take it for. It really is the fundamental constituents of who we are. And that's what I have to say for today. And I certainly would love lots more discussion. So I open the floor to anybody who'd like to add.
Yeah. Every situation in life is temporary. So when life is good, make sure you enjoy and receive it fully. And when life is not so good, remember that it's not lasting forever and better days are on the way.
Satu.
Satu.
I do remember.
Oh, sorry. Go for it, Victor.
I do remember reading somewhere that the Buddha was asked certain questions, and he said that, that's not a valid question. So things like, how did the earth begin? Or how did life begin? Or how did the universe start? And I think the Buddha's response, I read it somewhere, I think, was that's not a really valid question. That's not a question that he would address. And so it reminds me of kind of when I discern something, when a monk discerns something, or when I have a feeling of something, or when I perceive something, that there's probably this I is not a valid question, that he's talking about the aggregates, the precipitants, and kind of what is the mechanism that makes these things change. It's probably not where he's at in this form of reduction analysis.
Yeah, you're right. That is, there's an entire student about that where a student where a student comes to him and says, yeah, I'm leaving if you can't tell me like whether or not there's a God or there's not a God or what happens after life and all those things. And he makes that point. That's where he says, that's like getting struck by an arrow and saying, hey, I'm not going to pluck out this arrow until somebody tells me where it came from and who made it, what the poison's made out of.
Mm-hmm.
They're called unprofitable questions. And he's like, what good is that going to do to relieve your suffering? Pluck out the arrow. You take out the arrow. Who cares? What's at the end of life? Pluck out the arrow right now. And what's the arrow? The arrow is something comes at me and it hits me. And I say, this is what's happened. And I discern it. And I have a feeling about it. I either want it or I don't want it. And I push it away or I grab it. And when I do that, I grab a consciousness that says, see, I feel better because I pushed it away or I grabbed it. And that creates a constant spinning wheel, chasing one thing after another, after another, after another, after another.
Right.
Yeah.
And nothing is nothing is really permanent. The thing that kept in my mind was that when I was younger, I hated broccoli. Mom put broccoli on my plate. God, I hated broccoli. Today I eat broccoli. It's great. I enjoy it.
That's a great example. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Nothing, Vicky? Linda? Lena?
It's still absorbing, I think.
Yeah, that's how this stuff seems to work. But I'm glad we
Me too. The slowing of it down is an amazing, I'm kind of in awe of this morning.
Yeah.
I appreciate how we've slowed down the discussions of these. It gives us time to just kind of chew on it piece by piece instead of, all at once.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do every time I work on one of these talks, I think, boy, maybe we should just do this again in a minute. Just start over from the beginning and go step by step again. Now that we've had kind of an overview, we could certainly, and it kind of happens in Dhamma talks. I mean, we've been doing this a long time, and lots of teachers come out and they'll give a talk. And today I talk about the 5 aggregates, and next week I talk about, say, the 3 poisons or whatever. And what I'm seeing here is that there's a very deliberate method in this teaching. It's a very deliberate untangling, starting with your body, which we can all agree with, moving on to your feelings, which we can all agree with, and then diving a little deeper into what's happening with each one of those things. And we're getting to the very end. We've got one more section next week to talk about. And then I'm going to do a session that's kind of a conclusion of this examination that we've done so far. And then in the Maha Satipatthana Sutta, so the Great Satipatthana Sutta, we continue with the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Those are added to the end of the sutta. So we'll conclude everything by spending a couple of days looking at those 2 things, which are, of course, the big teaching. But we get to why. We've now unraveled this briar patch, and we get to, and that is why the 4 Noble Truths make sense. And once you go, okay, the 4 Noble Truths make sense, well, then what other way is there to lead your life but the Eightfold Path? And so that's where we're headed. But for today, I'll wrap it up and conclude with.
I was gonna say in response to Wayne's when he opened the discussion, he had that, if life's good, just experience it fully. This too shall pass, and if life's not so good, then hey, that'll pass too. And it seems to me you want to say, when life's good, experience it fully because this too will pass, or this will pass. Yes. And then when life's terrible, experience it fully because this too will also pass.
Right. I think there's some really important things there because, if success and wealth and happiness and fame were what made an enlightened being, then Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift would be enlightened beings, right? They're like top of the food chain here. We watch them in the Super Bowl. They're happily in love, right, and they're doing all these things. And yet
there are a few other people too that would be like shocking to say, no, that's got to be an enlightened being.
Right, exactly. It's like, if that's the top of the food chain, and that's what, that makes you say, well, it can't be fame, wealth, happiness. It can't be those things. So then maybe it's in the place where we don't look, because nobody looks in the dark. Nobody looks at the dark corners and says, what's going on there? We hide from that. We push it away, reverse. So clinging is easy to see. I want to be rich and famous and happy and sexy and all those things. Aversion, a little harder to look at. But you're right, Chris, that he says here, he's like, notice the pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and notice that it all comes and goes. So there's your dark thought for the day.
I was going to say, just real quickly to Vicky's point, that how quick, how it's slowing this down. What you're doing is slowing it down so that you can see the parts, that the aggregates that make this all happen and bring this all into being. And that's the whole point of the practice, is to be able to slow it down so that you can see it. Because all of us, all sentient beings, this is what's happening to us. But it happens so fast, so rapidly, so quick, that you can't see all the little pieces. All you do is, most of us just react to an emotion. We have an emotion, but we don't understand what caused that emotion. We don't understand what brought us up to that point. And so that's, to me, that's the whole point of the practice, is to slow it all down so that you can then see it as it arises and then say, I'm going to pluck that arrow out.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And so
and that's the whole point. That's the
it begs the question, like, is this informing your practice? Like, as we've been doing this, are you turning this insight, this discussion of 4 foundations of mindfulness, are you turning this towards your practice? That's an excellent point, Wayne, because that's what we're doing, right? We're here to unravel this, to understand this, and this is how the Buddha said to practice. That's what this Sutta is. For sure. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll conclude for today. I'll share my our service presentation, and we can reflect together. May we abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may we maintain well-being in ourselves. May everyone abide in well-being, freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their actions and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such actions is the heirs. We'll do the salutation to the Triple Gem. Araham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavatam Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Abhivademi Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawakasanko Sangham Namami.
All right.
All right.
You are.
I hope you all practice well this week and see your aggregates clearly. If anybody's got any questions or thoughts, or they want to talk some more, feel free to stick around. Other than that, see you next week. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Again, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Great week.